Walk through any American suburb in the early 1970s and you'll find him. He's in his mid-20s. He works at a plant or a steel yard or behind a desk downtown. He comes home at the same time every day, and he owns the house he comes home to. Not rents, owns. His wife might work or she might not. Either way, the house is covered. The car is covered. There's money for a week at the lake in August. That life is gone now. Not faded. Gone. Today, the median American home costs 5.6 times the median household income, the highest ratio ever recorded in the history of this country. The typical first-time buyer is now 38 years old. And most people buying a home for the first time need 2 incomes just to qualify. You didn't fail. The architecture that made that life automatic was systematically taken apart. In this video, we're going to show you exactly how it happened. 3 specific turning points. A secret memo written in 1971 by a man weeks away from a Supreme Court appointment, a president who fired 11,000 workers in a single afternoon in 1981, and a tax law signed the same week that quietly redirected the entire American economy. This is the story of who changed it and why. To understand what was taken, you have to see what was actually there. According to a 1978 report by the U.S. General Accounting Office, home buyers in the 1950s and the 1960s were predominantly first-time buyers in their early 20s with only one income, one earner, a starter home in a new suburb, a Chevy in the driveway. That was the median experience, not the wealthy experience, the median experience. This was not luck. It was architecture. Unions covered roughly 35% of American workers at their peak in 1954. That meant collective bargaining set wage floors not just for union members, but for everyone around them, because non-union employers had to compete. The top marginal income tax rate sat above 90% through most of the 1950s and into the 1960s, which meant capital that would otherwise have flowed to the top was redirected through public investment in highways, schools, and infrastructure that made affordable suburban life possible. Home prices, measured against income, ran about 2 to 1. 2 years of your salary bought a house. By 1978, that ratio had shifted to roughly 3.7 to 1. The median household income that year was $15,060. The median new home price was $55,700. One income could still reach it, barely. But the same GAO report noted the shift already underway. By 1978, the typical home buyer was 33, not 23. He was buying his second home, not his first. The first-time buyer on a single income was already being phased out, not by his choices, by math that was being written somewhere else. What built this middle-class architecture? Not virtue, not simply hard work. A specific set of policies and power structures created conditions where the average wage covered an average life. When those structures began to erode, the life eroded with them. You were told it was your spending habits. It was the architecture. On August 23, 1971, a corporate lawyer named Lewis Powell sat down and wrote a memo that was never supposed to be public. It was addressed to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and it was titled, Attack on American Free Enterprise System. It was a blueprint for corporate America to take back political control of the country. Powell argued that American corporations had been too passive, too willing to let consumer advocates, labor unions, and regulators constrain them. That passivity, he wrote, was now existential. Business needed to organize, fund, and fight. 2 months later, Nixon nominated Powell to the Supreme Court. The memo went underground into corporate boardrooms across America. The results were swift and precise. In 1968, roughly 100 corporations had public affairs offices in Washington. By 1978, 7 years after the memo, more than 500 did. In 1971, only 175 firms had registered lobbyists in Washington. By 1982, nearly 2,500 did. Corporate PACS grew from under 300 in 1976 to over 1,200 by 1980. In 4 years across the Carter administration, the corporate political infrastructure went from a scattered collection of trade groups to a permanent, coordinated, well-funded machine. That machine had one primary purpose: roll back the policies that kept wages up and costs down for working families, weaken OSHA, defang the FTC, block labor law reform, oppose collective bargaining expansion. The reason you eventually needed a second income wasn't that you wanted more. It was that the architecture protecting your first income was being dismantled, one lobbying fight at a time, while you were working. The Powell memo didn't raise your rent, but it funded the people who made sure your wages never caught up. By the summer of 1981, the machine built in the 1970s was ready to use, and on August 5th of that year, Reagan gave it its test run. 13,000 air traffic controllers had gone on strike. They wanted better wages, shorter shifts, and equipment that did not belong in a museum. Reagan gave them 48 hours. When they did not return, he fired 11,345 of them permanently and had their union decertified within weeks. The message reached every corporate boardroom in America before the afternoon was over. Within years, major companies used the same playbook. Major strikes, which had averaged more than 300 per year before 1981, fell to an average of 16 per year by the 2010s. Workers stopped striking because striking had become the fastest way to lose your job. Private sector union membership, which had been around 20% as late as the early 1980s, collapsed. Today it sits at 6.3%. Research found that the erosion of collective bargaining accounts for 25 to 33% of the rise in wage inequality since 1973. 8 days after the firings, Reagan signed the Economic Recovery Tax Act. The top marginal income tax rate was cut from 70% to 50%. Capital gains taxes fell from 28% to 20%. Over the following decade, the top rate eventually dropped to around 30%. The national debt nearly tripled. The wealth unlocked at the top did not return to the middle. Wages flatlined. The second income went from optional to obligatory. The two-income household was not about ambition. It was a financial floor that replaced a structural one that had been removed. You started working twice as hard to stay in roughly the same place, and the gap between that place and a house, a car, and a week at the lake kept widening every year. We tell ourselves the story of decline as a personal story. We did not save enough. We spent too much. We made the wrong choices. But the numbers do not tell a personal story. They tell a structural one. In 1960, 68 out of 100 Americans could afford to buy a home. Today, only 43 out of 100 can. That is not 25 families making different choices. That is a system producing a different outcome. The single-income household was not a historical accident. It was the product of deliberate policy. Unions negotiated real wages, tax structures recycled wealth downward, and political arrangements kept housing costs from devouring the paycheck. When those arrangements were dismantled, starting in 1971 and accelerating through the 1980s, the life they had supported went with them. What was really lost was not the house. It was the margin. The ability to absorb a layoff, a medical bill, or a broken transmission without catastrophe. The freedom to be one person, doing one job, and still make it work. That margin was the American middle class, not a tax bracket, but a buffer. They took it one memo at a time. They fired one union at a time. They passed one tax cut at a time, slowly enough that no one called it what it was. The question is not whether your grandparents had it easier. The question is, who decided they would, and who decided you would not?